A very warm good morning to all of you. Dear students, once again, welcome back to the English literature class. Today, we are going to see the end of the story, the tail end of the same story which we were discussing from the last few number of classes. Unit number 6. Title of the chapter is An Angel in Disguise, written by T.S. Arthur. Do you remember what we were discussing in the last class? The youngest child of the dead lady was adopted by Mr. Joe Thompson. He took the child to his home, but his wife was not happy with the act. She was very angry with her husband. But at last, Mr. Joe Thompson, was able to convince her. He left the child and his wife at home and went to his shop for the routine work. At the end of the day, after completing all the works, he was coming back to his home. By the time through the window he has seen that Mrs. Joe Thompson and the child, they were having a very happy conversation. A very pleasant atmosphere Mr. Joe Thompson felt once when he entered into his home. At the night when they were having their dinner, there was a small talk between Mr. and Mrs. Joe Thompson. It was like this. What are you going to do with that child? Mrs. Thompson asked to her husband. What's your plan about the child? As a reply, Mr. Joe Thompson told, I thought you understood me that she was to go to the poorhouse, replied Joe as if surprised at her question. So, something like quite naturally or something like already well planned, Mr. Joe Thompson told, as you know, the child has to go to the poorhouse. Tomorrow I'll go and meet the guardians and I will get an appointment. Then the matter will be over. So, the child has to go to the poorhouse. Here we have stopped in the last class. Let's see what had happened at the end. What's a twist? How the end of the story is. Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for sonic moments and then dropped her eyes. But Mrs. Thompson was not happy with the reply of Mr. Thompson because she was never expecting such a reply. She thought that there will be some concern in the heart of Mr. Thompson and he will be saying that we will keep the child for forever. But he replied like we will send the child to the poorhouse. So that's why it was really a shocking reply for Mrs. Thompson. And she was not happy with that. That's why she just dropped her eyes. She was not ready to look at Mr. Joe Thompson. The subject was not again referred to during the meal. While they were having their dinner, they have never discussed again the same topic. The subject was not again referred. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter. So, once when their dinner was over, Mrs. Thompson, she took a slice of bread and added some milk and butter to the slice of bread, adding to this a cup of tea. So, she has taken a cup of tea. She took them into Maggie and hold the small waiter on which she had placed them, while the hungry child ate with every sign of pleasure. So she took it to the room of Maggie, where on a tea tray she has kept all the things. And the child was very angry because the whole day she had nothing except when the villagers came for the burial of the lady, they have bought something for the children. Except that she had nothing throughout the day. So that's why she was hungry. The child ate with every sign of pleasure, with all the happiness. The child had the food which is given by Mrs. Joe Thompson. Is it good? Asked Mrs. Thompson, seeing with what a keen relish the food was taken. There's a new word, relish. Relish means a pleasant taste. So, the way how the child was having food, by seeing that, Mrs. Thompson asked the child, is it good? Is it tasty? Is it delicious? Are you really enjoying the food? To the child, Mrs. Thompson asked. The child posed with the cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that awoke to new life all the human feelings which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. Two new words are there. First one, slumbering. Slumbering means sleeping. And second one, a half a score. Half a score means 10 years. A score means 20 years. Half a score means half of 20, which means 10 years. The child posed with the cup in her hand. So the child, while she was having food, Mrs. Thompson asked, "Is it tasty?" So the child posed for a while with the cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude. So she didn't utter any word, but she just looked at Mrs. Thompson, and in the look itself there was a lot of meanings. It was fully filled with gratitude that awoke to new life all the human feelings which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. That look, the way how the child looked at Mrs. Thompson with gratitude, it has awakened the feeling which was sleeping in her heart for 10 years. Here it is saying that the 10 years, it is referring about the life of Mrs. Thompson as a wife, which means after her marriage, still the time. Okay, almost 10 years of marriage life they were having, but she has never experienced the cuteness of a child in her life. She never knew what or how a child must be taken care and what kind of feelings are getting from that. For the first time in her life, after the marriage or at 10 year, when the 10-year was getting over, she has experienced it for the first time in her life, all the human feelings which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. Since last 10 years, or from the time of her marriage till that day, she had never experienced it. It was sleeping inside her heart. And at this particular moment, it has waken up. We will keep her a day or two longer. She is so weak and helpless, said Mrs. Joe Thompson in answer to her husband's remark. So, at breakfast time on the next morning. So, on the next day, when they were having breakfast, Mr. Joe Thompson told something. So, as a reply to that, Mrs. Thompson told, "We will keep her a day or two longer. She is so weak and helpless." Because slowly, once one night is over, but in the heart of Mrs. Thompson, it was enough to create a huge sympathy, concern, love towards the child. That's why she says that we will keep her a day or two. So let's keep her for 1 or 2 or day. She is so weak and helpless, said Mrs. Joe Thompson in answer to her husband's remark. What her husband told that he must step down and see the guardians of the poor about Maggie. So when they were having their breakfast, Mr. Joe Thompson told, "Okay, today I will go and meet the guardians of the poor house." So to this particular remark, Mrs. Thompson told, "We will keep her for 1 or 2 days." "She'll be so much in your way," said Joe. Mr. Joe Thompson told. When Mrs. told that we will keep her for 1 or 2 days, Mr. Joe Thompson told, No, it will be a big task for you. It will be a big burden for you. She will disturb you throughout the day because she's a bedridden child. You have to help her in all the activities. So it will be a big task for you and big burden for you," said Mr. Joe Thompson, her husband. "I shall not mind that for a day or two. Poor thing." So Mrs. Thompson, she has changed into such a state that she told, "I don't care about it. I don't mind it for a day or two. After all, it's just a matter of 1 day or two. So for me, it's just a poor thing." Joe did not see the guardians of the poor on that day, on the next, nor on the day following. So Mr. Joe Thompson, he did not visit the guardians on that particular day, or not on the next day, nor on the following days. None of the days he met the guardians of the poorhouse. In fact, he never saw them at all on Maggie's account. To discuss about Maggie's matter, he never met the guardians of the poorhouse. For in less than a week, Mrs. Joe Thompson would as soon leave thought of taking up her own abide in the almshouse as sending Maggie there. So within 1 week, Mrs. Thompson, she left thinking of sending Maggie to the almshouse. Almshouse means a house meant for the old and the poor. So the people who are orphans, the people who are very old, for them, something like old age home we can say like. But orphans are also being admitted there. That's what is meant by almshouse. So Mrs. Thompson left thinking of sending Maggie to the almshouse, or in other words, as it is mentioned in the textbook, poorhouse. Here the story is getting over. So the author is winding up the story here. So according to the story, Maggie started to live with Mr. and Mrs. Joe Thompson. Means exactly like their own daughter. They considered the child as their own daughter. So here the story is getting over. Now the author says, what light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the poor wheelwright? Here the author is reminding us what really had happened in the life of Mr. Joe Thompson, who was after all a mechanic of the wheels of cars. So something had happened in his life at his home, something then. What is that? What light and blessing did that sick and helpless child brought to the home? It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself. For Mrs. Thompson, throughout her life after marriage, she was not having anything to love rather than loving herself. That's why the house was filled with dark, cold, and miserable. Different kinds of problems faced by the couple. And so because becomes sore, irritable, ill-tempered, and self-afflicting in the desolation of her women nature. Okay, so this is what had happened in the life of Mrs. Thompson. Since she was not having anything else to anything else to love, her life was something like desert, nothing else. Everything was full of dirty, then disturbing things. It became so irritable, something which created irritation, ill-tempered, always angry, and self-afflicting. What is the meaning of the word self-afflicting? Self-afflicting means causing pain or suffering to self. So she was totally angry, and when she was angry, she did number of mistakes, and because of that, a lot of suffering happened in her own life. In the desolation means loneliness. So since she was not having anything else to love rather than loving herself, she was fully disturbed. She was not having happiness in her life. She never knew what is happiness in her life after marriage. So these were the problems which was affected in the life of Mrs. Joe Thompson. Now the sweetness of the sick child looking over to her in love, patience, and gratitude was as honey to her soul, and she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. But now, once the child came to their house, the sweetness of that sick child, though the child is sick, there was a sweetness, cuteness, looking over to her in love. Whenever the child looked at Mrs. Thompson, there were a lot of love, gratitude. Patience and gratitude was as honey to her soul. So she was having already a number of problems since she never experienced the love of a child. So it was something like honey which can cure the wounds, the burns of our body. Same way, the presence of the child, her childish look, then her love, her patience, and her gratitude, everything was something like a honey to her soul, and she carried her in her heart. So Mrs. Thompson carried the bedridden child in her heart as well as in her arms, and for her it was a precious burden. There was some happiness in carrying that child in her arms. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. Okay, throughout that area or nowhere in the neighborhood a person who drank daily of more precious wine of life. So for Mr. Joe Thompson, it was something like a precious wine of life to him. Or in other words, a person who is drinking wine, he'll be enjoying his life. And here, Mr. Joe Thompson was enjoying his life something like a precious wine because he has that much happiness in his life. He enjoyed it. He really experienced it. An angel had come into his house, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary chambers with the sunshine of love. So, what really happened? What is the reason behind everything? What is the reason behind the changes in the life of Mr. and Mrs. Joe Thompson? It is just because of the presence of that child. Though the child is sick, the sick child is really an angel. An angel had come into his house, disguised, changed its appearance as a sick, helpless, and miserable child. But since the angel is at their home, the home was filled, all its dreary chambers, with the sunshine of love. All its dull chambers, dreary means dull, dreary chambers with the sunshine of love. An angel who, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, has filled its dull chambers, rooms, with the sunshine of love. That's why Mr. and Mrs. Joe Thompson, they really started to enjoy and live like human beings. Still then, their life were full of dryness. There was nothing to look at and to consider like they can love it. But now something is there in their life to love, and it changed their life. It was something like a blessing from God, or it can be something like there was raining upon dried lands. So that's why Mr. and Mrs. Joe Thompson, they started to experience the new life with the presence of the child. Dear students, this is the story, and I hope you have understood all the concepts related to the story. Here we are winding up this chapter. This chapter is getting over here. In the next class, we will be discussing the next chapter. A new topic will be discussed. Still we meet in the next class with the new topic. I would like to sign off. Thank you.